Charlie was pretty fast with a gun, but this one's faster than the devil.
For all I know, he is the devil.
The Great Silence is a spaghetti western I've always wanted to see. Never managed to get round to it. So when we were doing a western month, obviously, I was like, sweet, that's going first on my list. And it's interesting because it kind of goes against a lot of the hallmarks of what I think of as a spaghetti western. So it's not surprising to learn that Sergio Corbucci was sick of making westerns when he came to make this. He didn't really have much interest in it. He had up and down commercial and critical success, and he was just kind of done with the genre. And two things got him really inspired to give it another go. Firstly, the idea of doing a western set during a blizzard, which really does make it visually, at least, stand out in a big way. Having your hero gunslinger as a mute.
Well, so long, friend. I hope you'll be a little bit more talkative next time.
Yeah, here's your saddle.
His friend and actor Marcello Mastroianni gave him the idea for a mute gunfighter when the actor was telling him about how he always wanted to get work in a western, but he couldn't because he didn't speak English. So the movie opens with silence, the hero of the piece. Everywhere is blanketed in snow as far as the eye can see. And he hears something, and you can tell like there's someone in the woods, or something in the woods. And he ends up getting into a gunfight with a bunch of lads who jump out, a bunch of bounty hunters, we learn. He managed to take them all out, except for the last guy, who he shoots the thumbs off of.
I won't do it again. I'm through with bounty hunting. Don't kill me, Silence.
You're thinking like, why has he done that? It's typical sort of spaghetti western thing as well, where you're such a good shot, not only can you kill 5 guys at once, but the last one you can shoot his thumbs off, so you can spare his life.
Yeah, I mean, that guy, it kind of immediately establishes Silence as a badass, you know what I mean?
Absolute badass.
Yeah, I love, what I really liked about this scene is the contrast of his whole black outfit against the snow, and I was like, oh, this guy's cool as fuck. And then it introduces you straight away to his weapon. I was like, I've never seen this weapon used in a western before, and it's so quick. So,
which is a funny thing, because Sergio Corbucci, we reviewed his other film, Django, which obviously had that crazy big machine gun type weapon. And he seems to be a big fan of gadgety guns for his heroes.
I got really confused here, actually, because this film's set in the 1800s.
1899.
1899. And it kind of looked like, you know when you see a lot of war films, the German always has that pistol. I think it's like a Walther or something like that. And I was like, there's no way this could have been invented. This is a mistake. But I actually looked into this, and that gun did exist, and it was invented 2 years before the year this film was set.
So he wants to spare this guy's life, and another thing it establishes in this opening scene is the fact that he has a really strong moral compass. If he can, he spares the life of anyone he's getting into a gunfight with, and he'll shoot off their thumbs. I suppose then they can't pull a trigger, but you don't pull it with your thumb.
Yeah, I guess they can't. I don't know though, because they can never work again, really. And
it is his thumbs though, isn't it? I'm not getting confused, because it's not his thumb, it's not his trigger finger.
It's definitely his thumbs. It means...
I guess you can't hold a gun.
You can't hold a gun, which I guess to Silence goes to the fact that they can't murder innocent people ever again.
The point is, he doesn't want to kill if he doesn't have to.
Yeah.
And he's trying to spare this guy's life. Some gunfire comes from a bush nearby though and kills the guy that Silence is trying to spare. And a group of men coming out of the bushes. And we learn that these are bandits that are hiding out in the mountaintops on account of, during this really, really harsh winter, where there's a huge blizzard going on, this small little town and area has been totally isolated. There's no food, there's no crops, some of the cattle's died, no food supplies are getting in, so people have resorted to stealing. And now there's bounties on all of their heads. We learn later that one of the bigger villains in this movie is responsible for that, and there's more of a conspiracy going on. You also get hints that it might be to do with their religious beliefs. You have some dialogue later on that mentions this, but it kind of depends on what version of the film you're seeing and what dubbing. When the film is spoken in Italian, there's a lot less emphasis on the fact that these people have certain religious beliefs. In some of the English dubbings, they literally specify them as Mormons. In the English dubbed version I saw, there's no mention of them being Mormons, but it does. Loco at one point talks about their religious beliefs.
Those are dangerous men, Sheriff. They're enemies of God and man. The things they preach. What if one had his say in court and got acquitted? They'd be all using the courts to spread whatchamacallit. No, it's a patriotic duty to exterminate them.
And I believe in the Italian version with the English subtitles, there's very little mention of their religious beliefs at all.
This is very cool because I actually watched the Italian version with English subtitles. So I was wondering why they was up there. Obviously it's established later.
It has a certain storytelling style, kind of like Once Upon a Time in the West, where things aren't clear at first. It unfolds slowly what's going on. Once Upon a Time in the West does a lot better with repeat viewings. So I'm definitely going to watch this movie again now, understanding it properly, because I reckon it will hold up really well and probably get better on repeat viewings.
How did you find the English dub version?
Do you know what? It's actually, like, I was kind of disappointed that it was some of the best, probably the best dubbing I've ever seen in a spaghetti western. There really wasn't any of the charm, and the voice actors they chose were brilliant. Like, they did such a good job. And I know most of them, it was filmed in Italy, like spaghetti westerns, and there was a lot of different languages being spoken on set. So it's really impressive. It's some of the best dubbing I've seen in a movie from that era. So the hothead who shot the guy whose thumbs were missing, he doesn't want to stay out with the bandits out in the mountains anymore. He's got a plan, and he hasn't told anyone else, but he goes off home to meet his mama. And he's got a plan where he's meeting these lawyers who are supposedly, they think they can help him, and he's got a case and this, that and the other. And when he gets there, it turns out they are the bounty hunters. And we get introduced to our villain of the piece for the first time, Loco, who is a really good bad guy in this. He's quite three-dimensional. He feels like a real character. He's got a lot of personality, but not just your usual evil villain. He does something messed up and laughs for 5 minutes with all his buddies as he's about to do it, and then or shoots a kid. He is evil, you see him at moments where he's like really reveling in torturing these guys. But it's more about greed, but he also has a real humour about him. He has a kind of a funny outlook on life in a lot of ways, and kind of at certain times speaks sense even if you disagree with it or it's coming from a very morbid place.
I'm sorry, but it's our bread and butter, understand? Well, I'll take me into town.
I thoroughly enjoyed Klaus Kinski's portrayal of Loco. Although I knew that I should hate him because he's a scumbag, I kind of also liked him in other scenes, and it betrayed the two sides of him, where sometimes he is kind of likeable and then sometimes he's an absolute scumbag. So I thought Klaus Kinski's performance was really fantastic in this.
Well, he was supposedly trying to channel Boris Karloff, the great actor who played a lot of vampires and monsters in movie making. But I feel like he was also must have been channeling a lot of his own personality. Because by all accounts, he was a hunk of shit. He was having an affair at the time with the American actress who was playing Pauline. And he writes about in his autobiography, using a different name, but clearly referring to her, talking about how he slept with her, but he describes her physical looks in a really negative, horrible way. Says she has no arse, no tits, no thing. Then talks about sleeping with her all night and then going back into his room to kiss his daughter and wife good night or whatever, and just real nasty. Also, one day on set when he was working with the actor playing the sheriff, who was of Jewish descent, he began saying horrible things about his Jewish heritage and talking about how I'm from Germany, we hate Jews. Claimed later he was trying to help him get into character, but I don't know, judging by everything else about you read about this guy, he seems like he was a big personality, but also a real piece of shit, quite like the character he plays.
He must have been a very good actor, because by the time of his death, he'd been in the game for 40 years, and he had easily surpassed over 100 film roles, so he must have... Well, you can tell that he's a very good actor in this, so it kind of begs the question, why are all the best actors such scumbags? Edward Norton vibes, do you know what I mean? But
that's a good point.
But even though he was a scumbag, I'm going to put that to the wayside, because I never put that as Oh, I don't like this performance because he's a scumbag. I think he was brilliant in this film.
Yeah, I mean, I will put a limit on it. Like, I refuse,
yeah.
refuse to ever. I'll watch a Roman Polanski movie, but I'll never watch it in the cinema if there's a new one. I never do it in a way where it's going to put any money in his pocket.
Yeah, I get you.
So next we meet the governor, who is sick of all the outlaws and bounty hunters killing all these people and all this terrible stuff that's going up in the mountains. He wants law and order in the area.
The Old West is finished. We must learn to live with people of all races and persuasions and unite to make a new West. Yes, use that in my next speech.
He used to be in the army and he knows an old soldier friend of his, so he hires him to be sheriff, kind of nearly just forces him. He doesn't really want to do the job, but he just makes him do it.
He quickly established his authority, which I liked about this character, but he also is a bumbling idiot, as we see later on.
Yeah, like, that's the thing with Sergio Corbucci's movies. The characters in them, they're rarely, outside of the main character, because they are almost always are these kind of stoic, merely just a reason to have the story play around and point the camera at times. But a lot of his side characters are always pretty non-one-dimensional.
Yeah.
So I love the moment where you see the sheriff is making his way to town. His horse throws him off and it's refusing and it's bucking and he's saying you're a disgrace to the army and I'm going to report you to General whatever.
Now fall in, march. You're a disgrace to the army. I'll report you to General Beecher.
Ambushed by the bandits and they take his horse and he says why, and apparently they're taking it just to eat and live off for a few weeks. So you get an idea of how desperate these people are.
There's a lot of areas in it where it's not black and white and it's grey areas. It's like these people that have been outcast to the mountains, they're not bad people. It's just the way that life has put them in this situation, and they deliberately say to the sheriff in this scene, they establish, don't worry, we're not going to harm you. We just want your horse because we're starving, essentially.
It tries to get you to think about this because it reveals these in little glimpses. The bandits just are the bandits. They're up in the mountains. They got bounties on their head. That's all you know about them. This was the first moment where I was like, oh, these people are desperate. They're just trying to survive. And they don't necessarily have bad intentions. So the sheriff's making his way and he's trudging his way through the snow because he's got no horse now. And he comes across a stagecoach. So he beckons it down and he gets inside and sitting in the back is Silence, also heading to Snow Hill. So I really like the interplay where, he's chatting to Silence and it doesn't really occur to him that he's a mute and he can't talk back. And he never really talks back. He even says at the end of their journey, hope you're in a bit more talkative mood next time I come across you. But it's like a nice exchange. In his head, they've become friends and had a great chat.
It's like when you're on the train and like someone talks to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a very cool scene. I like the way it nicely set up their kind of relationship for the rest of the film.
So it's not long before they come across someone else in the snow who gets in the stagecoach. And it's none other than Loki, the bounty hunter. And he's literally tying loads of bodies of the bounties that he's found and killed onto the top of the stagecoach.
This is where you see the sheriff and Loco hit heads, because the sheriff gets out and confronts Loco at this point and says, what because he's just like got bodies like trying to tie him, trying to tie him to a stagecoach.
In fact, he wakes up as a body's face is sliding across the window next to him.
And it's like, it's never established, was he always going to get on this stagecoach? Did he pay for it? The stagecoach is essentially at this point like a tax, like an Uber.
Well, it's more like a bus.
Yeah, like a bus.
People are just jumping off.
And then this is where the sheriff...
So they roll into town, and as they're all getting off, we're introduced to Pollicut, the big banker of the area, and also the Justice of Peace. And straight away, he spots Silence coming out, and he tells one of his men to follow him and tell him where he goes. He has the authority to set out bounties on people's heads. He's also the person that lends the money to the local authorities and what will now be the new sheriff that's been appointed and just got into town. He lends the money to pay the bounties. He also, we find out later, is approaching the widows of the people being killed for the bounties and buying their homes on the cheap and their properties or anything they own on the cheap and either assimilating it into his own wealth that he already has or selling it on, flipping it basically for a profit.
His blood's on your hands too. How much interest are you going to charge this time for advancing the reward money, huh? It's you bloodsucker, who gets the law to put prices on folks' heads so you can profit.
I only perform my duties as the law specifies.
He's basically got a monopoly of the whole of Snow Hill because he also owns the general store. So he owns all the food coming in and out. So he controls everything. Like, he has the powers. He's basically a very scumbag, Holmes under the hammer kind of guy. Because earlier on, when they got in the stagecoach, I was like, Loco was kind of sitting directly opposite the Silence. I was like, do they know each other? And it establishes they clearly don't.
Well, Loco knows of him.
Yeah.
And you get the idea that he is kind of a known figure. Because he's kind of like the A-Team. People know of him, and if you're in trouble, you can write to him. Because the reason he's come to Snow Hill is because a widow of one of Loco's recent murders has wrote to Silence because she wants him to come and kill this guy who's Loco.
Put on that rifle and come out with your hands up. No! Now say goodbye to your husband. Always respect the dead. Now pack your husband in the snow. That'll keep him fresh till I collect his bounty. So don't you bury him, you hear?
Silence doesn't know this yet, or who Loco is, so he doesn't know it when he's in the stagecoach. But I found it kind of weird where they talk about him like he's this mythical figure who walks in the shadows that will, if you're in trouble, give him a call and he'll come and help you.
Once my husband told me of this man. He avenges our wrongs. And the bounty killers sure do tremble when he appears. They call him Silence.
But then when he arrives, it's pretty clear. You know, she says how much, and he writes on a little old book cover, $1,000. Who is he? Like, just wants to know. So a bit of cross wires there. Not really sure what was going on there, but basically he's willing to kill the guy, but she needs to raise the funds first.
How the fuck did the letter even get to him?
Yeah,
there's no fucking post.
When you start
trying in a blizzard.
When you start trying to break it down, it does sort of get a bit silly.
Like, it's like, there's no
to be fair though, he wasn't that far away. He was in the mountains nearby.
That is true.
So maybe she got word to him somehow.
Yeah, okay. We'll leave it as that.
Yeah. But anyway, also the actress playing Pauline, it was her debut. She was an American actress that came over, and I really liked her in this movie. And there was something about her presence, which she was just a good actress, and I think she had a lot of stage presence. But also I think it was the fact that you don't see black people in general in spaghetti westerns. And especially like actual black American actors portraying black people in America in spaghetti westerns. So I feel like that also gave this, among the other things that we'll go into later, makes this spaghetti western really unusual and interesting compared to other spaghetti westerns of the genre.
She's also very visually striking.
It's beautiful.
Like
we get to see a lot of her.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of in Once Upon a Time in the West, how visually striking she is. Claudia Cardinal, sorry.
Bombshell.
She's beautiful, and it's kind of like she's very visually striking, as in her the colour of the palette of her skin, as well as she has very striking eyes.
Yeah.
So very visually striking and a very memorable. I've
just never heard you call a woman visually striking before.
No, because you know, like,
she's beautiful. She is, but I know what you mean. She's quite distinct, and I think it's the fact that, you know, she has a warmth about her that really stands out against the snowy landscape. Speaking of the snow as well, like, I forgot to say this, but a lot of the snow you see is actually shaving cream.
Watching a film, I was like, that is not fucking real snow, is it?
Really? I would have never have clocked that.
No.
It's shaving cream. Also, at certain times, they use certain filters over the cameras or the lights so that the background hills that that didn't have snow on it, because obviously they couldn't do all the mountains, would be covered and obscured. And also at other times when they were trying to portray the blizzard really getting out of control, they were just messing with the aperture and the exposure on the cameras. It really sells it. Like, all the effects come together where I don't think I would have ever have guessed that you weren't seeing real snow.
Yeah, I only really clocked the unreal snow bit, not in the bits where it was on the floor. The bits where it was falling from the sky, because There was one bit where it looked very like fake to me, and I was
really?
That doesn't look like. It kind of looks like, you know, when you go to like a year 6 disco and they got like a Christmas disco, and they got those shit like snow machines and smoke, like, and you're like, oh yeah, it's like fake foam kind of stuff.
Yeah. Or if you're like at Disneyland and it's
basically
they're trying to it's that time of year, but you're also in Florida, so they can't do real snow. So Pauline needs to raise funds, so she heads over to the only person in town who can loan money, and that is of course the big banker. So she goes over to the store, and he basically makes a pass at her. He's kind of trying to find out, why do you need this money? He's already guessed and informed Loco that he thinks she's hiring Silence to assassinate the bounty hunter. Loco doesn't really give a shit, because I guess he does know who Silence is. He knows his reputation. He knows the fact that he only kills you if he has to, and he only shoots in self-defense. So he needs to provoke you first.
No, if you want me to kill him, put a good price on his head.
You ought to do this for nothing. It's in your own interest, Loco. Have you forgotten who he is?
So he wants to know why she needs this money, and she says, you know, it's her own business. But he basically says, if you fuck me, be my mistress, you can have the money. You can have all the money you need. But she refuses. She's disgusted by him. She just says, fuck it. I don't need the money then. I'll just leave. But we also realise, it's hinted that this was the real reason he put the bounty on her husband's head. You know, in actual fact, he hadn't really done anything. And even Loco asks him, like, why that last guy? I don't really get it. Like, why he didn't fit the... Seemingly, he didn't fit the bill of, like, the usual bounties he was going after. So, more and more, we're getting the picture that the banker is an absolute piece of shit. Yeah. And probably the bigger villain of the whole movie. So, Silence meets back up with Pauline. She basically says, look, I can't pay you. I don't have the money. But... you can fuck me now, after, before, and just whenever you want afterwards. If you do the deed and kill Loco.
This scene cracks me up a lot, because obviously we know Silence can't speak and everything is done by his physical actions. And this is why I quite like this film. I think they deliberately made it amusing, because Silence is sitting, you know, just in frame in a chair. And then she basically, in no uncertain terms, said, oh, fuck you for killing him. And when she turns around from the fireplace, the chair's empty and the door shuts. So like, it's like
they may as well had like the cartoon gust of wind behind him as he was running down there. And he goes down to the bar. Or is it a gambling house? I don't know. I think they're playing cards. They're not gambling. But anyway, Loco and all his bounty hunter friends are in there. And Silence is sitting in the corner. And you see he's just sitting there biding his time. And then he lights his cigar and flicks the match into Loco's drink. And you see Loco kind of ignores it, and he even goes to take a sip of his drink. So then Silence throws his whole cigar into the drink.
Yeah.
And Loco just kind of laughs, puts it down, and says, look, I know the score. I know you have to provoke me, because your little moral compass, you're not going to shoot me first. He even tells his friends, like, take my gun off me. And it's interesting, because you see... Silence is kind of snookered. He doesn't really know what to do. I guess he's never come across anyone who knows his little code of honour before. And what I didn't get is, why doesn't getting punched in the face also count as self-defence? Because they get into a bar brawl now.
I guess there's levels of it, because like in real life, there's still law and order there. Like if someone punched me in the face in real life, and I went from there to not punching them back and just shot them, like the degrees of it is a lot higher than physical, I suppose, and murder. Do you know what I mean?
It does feel, again, it feels like the consequences in life are more grounded in this movie from other spaghetti westerns.
Yeah.
Like, this, more than a lot of spaghetti westerns, it feels like only a spaghetti western in the actual traditional technical, it was filmed in Italy with Italian actors and dubbed over in English afterwards. But for all the themes and cliches of spaghetti westerns, it doesn't have all that many, other than, you know, the lone stoic gunslinger pivotal main character.
And what ensues now, you can really tell this director had also worked on the original Django, because he loves a bar fight. There's another bar fight, and this is probably where you see Loco's real scumbag side. Silence picks up a log and whacks him. He goes through the door, and then he goes to shoot silence in the back.
And interestingly, this is again like Western frontier logic where now the sheriff's allowed to arrest him because you can't shoot a man in the back. You can shoot him when he's facing you.
It's like, right, you've murdered about 10 people already, but just because you're shooting someone in the back, now I'm going to arrest you. Forget about the other 10.
And he actually does shoot him in the back. He shoots him through the shoulder.
Yeah.
So silence goes off and he ends up having a nice little sex scene with Pauline as she's treating his wounds. There's all this little sexual tension. Cool sex scene as well. It was very sexy. Like it was
a very sexy scene.
But it was like the way it's filmed, and there's some nudity and some breasts, but it's filmed with a lot of class. And he gets the angle just right where you really get the sense of the shape of a beautiful woman. Do you know what I mean? Like the angles and the curves. He films it in a way from just the perfect angle to really show her body at its most beautiful.
Do you know what? Fuck you, Klaus. If you're going to hear this, I think she had a very nice body.
A cracking body.
Yeah, so fuck you, sir.
It looked good though. It looked good. She looked beautiful.
And it's a very tasteful sex scene, and a very cool little score by Ennio in this. Beautiful. Very well lit. So all in
all the music from Ennio Morricone in this is just absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. And he said himself, outside his Leone films, he thought it was the best spaghetti western soundtrack he ever did. And
I agree. He's
not wrong because it's quite different. Like the movie is very different from other spaghetti westerns. It's quite a different soundtrack.
Yeah.
And it's quite, he, as much as we love the big charging guitar riffs and all the interesting elements he bring to it, he clearly loved his slow melodies a lot. When we went to see him live, he gave a lot of time to his melodies as opposed to his big, over-the-top, loud, booming scores.
It's very restrained and it's very soothing, and it's kind of like as you said, a world away from what we would see in the late Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns with the howling and stuff like that. And it perfectly does fit this film with the blizzard, I feel.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like if you had all that bombastic stuff of the snow, that kind of bombastic stuff to me only really fits a desert scene.
And I'm afraid, Sheriff, that if you don't release Loco immediately, other bounty hunters will be coming to get him out of jail. It wouldn't be good.
As for this skunk's friends, if there are any still around, they're going to have to break him out of the Tonopah jail because that's where I'm taking him.
So he's like, fuck it, I'm taking you to the next town over and I'm going to hang you. Take you in front of a judge, tell him everything you've done, do it the right way he sees it the right way. So they're making their way through the snow and they come across the bandits. But this time, he has the upper hand. Before, his gun wasn't working properly because he wasn't used to the cold. But now his gun is working. And you really see the sheriff, he is competent now. He is ready to take charge. He takes charge of the situation. All the bandits kind of do what he says. He also tells them, we got law and order now. The governor's working on getting amnesty for all you guys out in the hills here. So you go back to town, go back to Snow Hill, seek refuge there, get food, whatever you need to do. I'm going to take this guy to get hanged in the next town, and I'll meet you back there in a couple of days.
I guarantee you there's food for all of you at Snow Hill, so go there and feed yourselves. But take my advice, in future, go easy on the horse meat. It's not all as tender as mine.
All the bandits head back towards the town. Loco and the sheriff head on. But eventually, Loco's like, Sheriff, I need a shit.
Yeah.
Which you can't really argue with. What's he going to let the guy shit himself? So he starts, but earlier when they first met each other by the stagecoach, when you saw Loco putting the bodies of the men he'd killed on top of the stagecoach, he'd hidden a gun, and he finds this gun again and shoots the sheriff in a kind of weird way. You don't exactly see it, but he seems to shoot the ice underneath the sheriff.
Yeah, so I don't know, that death wasn't really struck me. I don't know, I wanted some kind of shootout. But
it was oddly filmed. Well, it couldn't be a shootout because he was, he had him cornered.
True, yeah.
And as we see throughout this movie, Loco isn't interested in fair shootouts. He is just there to sucker punch you if he can. So he kills the sheriff. He goes up and rounds up all his little bounty friends, and they head back towards Snow Hill. Meanwhile, Pauline and Silence are still shagging. Interesting again, Silence doesn't spend a lot of time doing hero stuff in this movie. He kind of just gets sidetracked and starts shagging Pauline the whole time.
Yeah, he does.
But anyway, they're going at it and they're kind of like having a chat in bed. She's talking about her husband. And then the big banker and his henchman burst in on him. You know, the henchman's holding down Silence and he starts burning his hand. And the big banker's trying to rape Pauline. Silence manages to get the better of the guy. He's basically, the henchman is burning his hand in this big bowl of burning coals. Yeah. And he manages to get behind him and force his head down into the coals and barbecues his face. It is disgusting.
Yeah, it's fucking horrible.
Pretty good effect for the times of the makeup of showing his burns, because he doesn't die. He's running around for the rest of the movie screaming in pain, basically.
Yeah.
And he kills the big banker. Before this, though, we've learned in a flashback that the reason he lost his ability to speak was when he was a child, his father had 2 bounty hunters show up, pretending to be the sheriff.
Yeah.
Tricked him into coming out and putting his gun down, and then killed him.
Yeah.
After seeing the boy, you get the impression that Pollicut wanted to kill the guy, but the other bounty hunter just decides, now we'll cut his voice box so he'll never be able to speak or tell anyone about it. And so there's that built-in revenge for Silence. But I guess, does he not remember that? Because he doesn't seem very intent on killing Pollicut. You'd think he'd want to kill him the moment he got into town, or already. Do you know what I mean? Or he would have killed him already.
This again is a bit of a grey area, which the film maybe could have done a bit better, but there's only a certain amount of time to.
Maybe there's something I missed, like on a repeat view, and I'd pick it up, but I was a little bit confused there.
But wasn't there a second one where he finds the second guy? And he kind of corners the second guy in a brothel, and then the guy's like looking at him like, "Who are you?" And then he pulls down his scarf.
To reveal the scarf.
And then obviously that guy recognises him, but Pollock doesn't seem to. So
yeah, I don't know. Well, I think Pollicut does at this point, but I'm just like, why has Silence not killed this guy?
Yeah.
But anyway, he kills him now, so all's well that ends well. So now that that's happened, they learn that the gang has arrived back in town and they're looking for him. And Barbecue Face, before he completely dies of his wounds, tells Loco where to find him. So they end up hiding in a barn from Loco and his gang. And they're pretty much about to find him when he hears news that the bandits, who were told by the sheriff to seek refuge in the town, are arriving. So they go, as the blizzard's really starting to get bad and visibility starting to get poor, they go and ambush the bandits just outside of town, round them up and take them as hostages into the local bar. So he sends news through Pauline to Silence, basically says, come and have a shootout. Me and you, one-on-one, have a shootout, settle this. If you kill me, all the hostages go free. If I don't, I kill them all.
Yep.
So Silence shows up, and we're here for the big finale. Your hero's going to turn up. You know what's going to happen. It's spaghetti western. He's going to show up. He's going to shoot the bad guy. There's going to be some sort of poetic way that he does it, or some badass line. Not in this case, because Silence doesn't speak.
Yeah.
But you pretty much know this is the beat for beat of how a spaghetti western works, and this is what's going to happen. So he shows up, and he gets shot in the hand by one of the other guys. And you're like, oh shit, he's not going to be able to use his gun now. How's Silence going to come over this?
Yeah.
How's he going to overcome this? And then he gets shot by another person in a sucker punch who's not involved in the shootout. And he starts to fall down. And you're like, fuck, man. So I guess he's going to have the noble, self-sacrificial death where he takes out all the bad guys as he dies. And then Loco pulls out his gun and shoots him in the head. And you're like, fuck. So Pauline runs over and grabs his gun, and you're like, oh, Pauline's going to get to kill him. And then he shoots her in the head, and she dies. And then he gives the order to his men, kill all the hostages. Yeah. And they shoot all the hostages. And everyone dies.
No, don't! Pity us!
And you're like, what the fuck?
I was kind of sitting there like this in a bit of shock because
it was well shocking.
At the end of the day, you get all the way to this end bit, and you're the whole time as the viewer, you're like, when is the bad guy gonna get his comeuppance? And he never does it.
He never does. And they round up all the bodies. They say there's bounties on every one of these heads.
Yeah.
So we'll be back for him soon, just as the law allows. And as they ride off, a title card comes up saying, public outcry was so egregious against what they'd done in this particular incident that this went on to help get the legislation through to kind of end the culture of bounty hunters and just being able to hire a bounty hunter and basically go over the natural law and orders of the land.
I think I read that there was an alternate ending in some countries where... Now, I haven't actually seen this. I just read it. It said there's a nicer ending where I guess...
I have seen it.
Silence survives.
So basically what happens is Sergio Corbucci was begrudgingly forced to film a happy ending. The happy ending never really got used anywhere, although some of the footage did get used for the trailer, which is kind of misleading. But basically I watched the scene and Silence just magically shoots everyone. He does get shot in the hand, but afterwards you see he's kind of got like a gold-plated armour, kind of akin to a fistful of dollars, under his hand, so that's how he was magically able to still pull his trigger. He kills all the bad guys. He basically turns into John Wick. He's doing like somersaults and jumping through windows and kills all the bad guys. Even the sheriff survives. He shows up miraculously just alive somehow. And he says to Silence, I could use help from a guy like you who rounding up all these bad bounty hunters in these parts. And Silence has like this big Tom Cruise megawatt smile and the movie ends.
The only way they could make that worse is if Silence just went, yes, I can speak now. Like, do you know what I mean?
Or he went, sounds good.
Yeah,
and then,
yeah.
Wink to the camera.
That sounds awful.
But if it did end with that scene, would you say it sounds awful? That's how most spaghetti westerns would end. And we love spaghetti westerns.
Can I make a point about Sergio... Is it Sergio Corbucci?
Yeah.
Does he have some weird kind of like Quentin Tarantino sort of foot fetish with hands? Because
he does like chewing up a hand.
Like,
or maybe it's the opposite. He hates hands.
He's shooting off thumbs, and in Django, he makes a 5-minute scene of zooming into hands and horses crushing them. So I'm like, why do you hate hands?
That's a really good point. He hates hands. He's anti-Tarantino.
Right. I wonder if someone like touched them. Touched him up with hands when he was young.
That's such an interesting point.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so strange. It just popped into my head.
But it's interesting. During the movie, the production of the movie, Martin Luther King was assassinated, JFK was assassinated, and before the movie, Malcolm X was killed, Che Guevara was murdered. Yeah. And that was, according to his wife, really in the back of his mind as he wrote and directed The Great Silence. A lot of this movie is about the state or the powers that be persecuting against the little guy. And with the ending, the deaths of the heroes, it's an absolute punch to the gut, the way they die and how they die. And I really wasn't expecting it, especially because it's a spaghetti western. But it's brilliant because Corbucci felt that the deaths of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and all these various notable figures, whatever you think of them, their deaths, as horrible as it was, actually did more for the causes they believed in.
Yeah.
And it's about that thing where sometimes dying or sacrificing yourself for the cause, or dying for the cause, becoming a martyr, can help the greater good.
Yeah.
Even if it's under horrible circumstances.
Yeah.
You would never wish it to happen. But yeah, so it's such an interesting spaghetti western. It's so different from any other spaghetti western you'd likely have seen. And it just shows again that Corbucci was a real progressive thinker and filmmaker. You saw in Django where he deals with race and white supremacy, and in this movie where his villain at one point talks about how the fact that he can't believe that bounties for black lives now are the same value as bounties for white lives. It doesn't seem like a big deal now, but this, I can't imagine in Italy or America or the UK back then that was a super popular opinion. You know, racial
Definitely,
equality and holding people like Malcolm X and Che Guevara as great figures.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you know, I'm not necessarily a big fan of Che Guevara, but it's just fascinating to have a filmmaker making these sort of movies, which generally, you know, a lot of like Roger Ebert and the likes, you know, they used to think these movies were trash. And a lot of them were, and a lot of them had trashy elements. And I say trash with affection and love. But you see it like in the grindhouse movie movement in America. A lot of the time, when you really wanted to say something that wasn't popular, that did go against the mainstream, but now would be seen as right, it would come from these sort of movies. You might get Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, where all of Hollywood show up and pat themselves on the back and do the, you know, a political nice message in a movie. But a lot of the time they only do it once it's already deemed socially acceptable to do so. And also filmmakers, for big studio movies, they're not going to back that. They're going to go with whatever's going to sell money. You know, now they can do it, so now they act like they're all high and mighty. But realistically, if it didn't make money, they wouldn't do it. So it really is an amazing movie.
Yeah, what really set me apart for me is all those things you've just said, but also just really the setting of it in a blizzard, which I didn't really see, or I haven't seen again since The Hateful Eight, which I guess, on reflection, Quentin Tarantino must have been, I guess, inspired by this film.
I'd say very.
Yeah.
Also, the aesthetic as well, and particularly even scenes like the scene where they all end up in the same stagecoach together, and moments like that clearly was just lifted entirely into the Hateful Eight. But yeah, so you know, spaghetti westerns usually they're kind of like Italian food themselves, the way it's quite simple ingredients. You know, it's not like fancy a million different ingredients and it takes 7 hours to cook and you do all different processes. It's a handful of nice ingredients, high quality food that you put together and make like a nice pasta. It's maybe like 5 ingredients. It's kind of the same with spaghetti westerns, where you get some beautiful music, you get some great cinematography, you get some charismatic actors, you chuck them together in a familiar beat that everyone knows, and you end up getting something that will satisfy you, or you'll love if you're a fan of the genre.
Yes.
But this one isn't your usual spaghetti western. It transcends the genre in a lot of ways. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly will always be the greatest spaghetti western of all time. Yeah. But this is probably one of the few spaghetti westerns where I would generally recommend everyone to see it if you're just a film fan at all, because it explores really interesting ideas in a time when you didn't have a lot of movies that explored it, and it explored it in a genre where you really always felt like you knew what you were going to get. In this one, you don't. You get pretty much the opposite. Yeah, just a fantastic film, and I can't wait to watch it a second time.
Yeah, highly recommended as well from me, Declan.
Yeah. See you next week.
Well, so long, friend. I hope you'll be a little bit more talkative next time.